Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel for the most anticipated video I think by most of you on this channel. I've been teasing this forever, I've been asked about this so many times, and I'm finally going to give you guys my rankings of the top 10 Star Wars Legends books and book series of all time. This is a list I have agonized over for my entire life. I started reading Star Wars Legends back when I was very young. Star Wars Legends has been a massive part of my life, and so many of these books really helped me get into Star Wars and become a huge Star Wars fan. It is really difficult to narrow it down to 10. Because it is so difficult to narrow it down to 10 specific books, I did include series and trilogies as one entry. Yes, that's kind of cheating, and there will be way more than 10 books on this list. I'm going to try to keep this list semi-spoiler free. Obviously, there will be things that come up in spoilers because this is a ranking, not necessarily a recommendations list, but because I do know a lot of people watch these lists in anticipation of reading all these things, I'll try to keep major plot points out of my discussion here. Also, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more, and stay tuned for my canon rankings, and then I'm going to have a joint canon and legends ranking in the future. And we're going to start with honorable mentions here because I have to mention a few things. So my first honorable mention is going to be the Hand of Thrawn duology, an absolutely brilliant duology by Timothy Zahn. It does a great job of transitioning us out of the kind of stale, redundant, and goofy storytelling towards the end of the Bantam era into what became the New Jedi Order. And continuing in that same vein with Timothy Zahn, Outbound Flight is one of my favorite Thrawn books. It's such a great early look at Thrawn in Legends, the more ruthless Thrawn that we see in Legends as opposed to canon. Also some great backstory for characters like George Cardass, who are big in Hand of Thrawn duology, and I really enjoyed that as well. Survivor's Quest is another really strong book, continues well off of Outbound Flight, and another good look at Luke and Mara's marriage. And then the Mara Jade duology, Allegiance, and Choices of One. I'm going to have to mention James Luceno's parts of the Dark Lord trilogy, Labyrinth of Evil, and Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader here in honorable mentions. I, Jedi, another book from the 90s that I really enjoyed, definitely helps the Jedi Academy trilogy's more ridiculous moments. Darth Maul Shadowhunter, one of the best looks at Darth Maul, just the ruthless nature of Maul. And the Han Solo trilogy, which is one of the best origin stories for any character in Star Wars Legends. So without further ado, let's just get to the list. So let's get going with number 10, which again, struggled so hard to put these in order, but I'm going with number 10 is going to be the X-Wing Rogue Squadron 4-book series. These books are written by Michael Stackpole, and they're some of my favorite dogfighting in all of Star Wars. One of my favorite things about this series is how Stackpole brings a new style to each one of the books. Rogue Squadron, very Top Gun-esque. Wedge's Gamble is more of a spy espionage thriller. Krytos Trap, political thriller, legal drama in some cases, and then you have the Back to War, which is this all-out Star Wars fun. My favorite of the series has always been Wedge's Gamble. I just really love the espionage angle, and it has such a great finale. Characters like Wedge Antilles are amazing here. He gets such great development and continues further later down the line. Then you also have new characters like Corran Horn and Mirax and Booster Terek, Gavin Darklighter, Oral. There are so many great characters here. The list could go on and on forever. And it's one of the best things Stackpole does is he makes these ensemble stories with a focus on Corran Horn, but everybody else gets their due. The characters are what you leave these stories with. And if you're looking for a great set of mostly EU original characters with some enhanced characters like Akbar and Wedge Antilles from the original trilogy, it doesn't get much better than the original 4 X-Wing books. Coming in 9th place, and this was honestly the hardest one to rank out of anything, and it is because there are so many books, and that is the New Jedi Order. The New Jedi Order is massive. It is 19 books long. It really does feel like cheating to put it here on one entry on the list, but the New Jedi Order as an initiative is completely and utterly an event. Reading just one book is not going to do it for you. You need to read everything. They all build off each other, and that's the best part of the initiative. The new extragalactic invader villains, the Yuuzhan Vong, add a new layer and a different twist to the Star Wars mythology. It gives us something different that's not Jedi versus Sith, while also still incorporating elements of the light and the dark in these stories. One of my favorite parts about these stories is the fact that the solo kids get so much more expansion. They basically are the main characters of these stories, and you get to go through the entire range of emotions with those kids. Jason, Jaina, Anakin, all of them are given excellent material throughout these stories. There's some heartbreaking moments. There's some truly contemplative moments that gets you as a reader thinking, I've never really thought about the Force that way. But Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, all the main characters are great here. Mara Jade also has some amazing moments. In a 19-book series, everybody's gonna get their due, but the authors here all do an amazing job really hammering home those big moments. This is a series, though, that when you start it, it does start out a little slow. Vector Prime is a great start for it, but once the series gets going, you are all in. It's one of the rare initiatives to have kind of the middle act of the initiative be the best part. Books like Traitor, Star by Star, Edge of Victory, and then at the end, the Unifying Force. There are enough excellent books in here to win. It does get stale, or when it does get a little bit slow, eventually you hit something that's just so epic, so wonderfully written, that you're back on board. You're really invested in the entire initiative, and it's one of those things that by the time you get to the end, it's hard not to have enjoyed the journey because you waited so long to find out what was going to happen. Going from a 19-book initiative to a single book for number 8, we're going with John Jackson Miller's Kenobi. Kenobi is an absolutely excellent look at the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi immediately after Revenge of the Sith. Unlike the Obi-Wan Kenobi show that you might be familiar with, Kenobi takes place much closer to the movie, in fact, days after the movie, and mostly spends its time within the 6 months to a year following the events of Revenge of the Sith. We see a broken, damaged Obi-Wan trying to reconnect with Qui-Gon Jinn, trying to find his purpose and what's next. Yeah, he has to protect Luke Skywalker, but what else is out there for him? How does he transition away from being the Jedi he's always been? John Jackson Miller does a great job getting into the headspace of Obi-Wan. There are some brilliant moments, some great internal monologues, and there's also other great characters that are added to this world. Get some great stuff with the Tusken Raiders as well that connects overall to a lot of the things we saw in later Star Wars Legends. Annalee Caldwell and the Caldwell family are all really interesting. In Star Wars Legends, we don't have too many character books as opposed to Star Wars Canon, where it's mostly character books. Most of Star Wars Legends prefers to expand the story to really give us interesting new lore. And Kenobi does that, but it takes a step back. It's introspective. It's really focused. And that's a pretty big breath of fresh air, especially when you're dealing with Star Wars Legends. Kenobi's always been one that I've really loved, and as my favorite character is Obi-Wan Kenobi, this one has stuck with me forever, and it's easily in my top 10. Coming in at number 7 is going to be one of the more controversial ones, but I do really love the Republic Commando series. Hard Contact, 000, True Colors, Order 66, and then of course Imperial Commando. These are all gritty, intense war books that really connect you to a set of clones and get you super attached to the Republic Commandos. Karen Travis's writing here is one of the reasons to read this series. She doesn't hold back. You also have some great moments, more intimate moments with the clones as they really learn to care about themselves as individuals more so than just doing their job or being soldiers, in that the original Clone Wars initiative looked at the clones as much more robotic. This really compares and contrasts them with the droids on the other side, the interpersonal relationships between the unit, the constant sense of dread being in these battles, and then also the relationships between the unit and the Jedi. Characters of Etain and Darman are a really interesting dynamic, but for the deeper examination of the clones, for the Mandalorian culture added to that, and for the way it looks at really every aspect of the Clone Wars, this has always been a favorite of mine and one that I think has a lot of really rich storytelling. Coming in 6th place is going to be the next part of the X-Wing series, and that is the X-Wing Wraith Squadron trilogy. The original trilogy of the Wraith Squadron series is one of my favorite Star Wars things ever. The characters here are so well defined, so well fleshed out, whereas Rogue Squadron does a great job of developing Corran and the people around Corran, while giving life to the rest of the characters. Here, there's not really a central lead. Wraith Squadron focuses on Kel Tainer and Tyria Sarkin, whereas Iron Fist is more about Ton Fanon and Face Loran. Mim Donos has a big role in the last book. Every book gives so much character to each one of the Wraiths, and on top of that, we get so much more development for characters like Wedge Antilles or Wes Jansen, characters we've seen before in the movies. Warlord Zinj is a compelling and brutal villain, maybe not quite as brutal as I haphazard, but has some great moments. Iron Fist is my favorite book of this trilogy. It is so good and so heartbreaking in so many ways. These books are just unpredictable. As opposed to Rogue Squadron, which are a little bit more traditional, Aaron Alston is able to do things that will shock you. And not just in the traditional, let's kill off some minor characters. There's some major deaths here. Things happen. Things get real. And I really love that about Wraith Squadron. It's what's more exciting to me about reading these books. What's a little bit more rewarding about reading these books. Coming in 5th place is going to be another character-centric book, and that's going to be Shatterpoint. I was blown away the first time I read Shatterpoint. I couldn't believe a Star Wars book was handled with such maturity. The character of Mace Windu has never felt better. I think one of the reasons that Mace works so well in the story is he never really becomes ultra likable throughout the story. You start to learn what drives him and what motivates him. His relationship with his former Padawan Depa Billaba and the way that plays in this scenario, in this Heart of Darkness style story. But Mace is still ruthless. He's brutal, and you're rooting for him as he continues to gain power and grow and change. But he doesn't necessarily ever become like this happy-go-lucky nice guy. And Stover just brilliantly locks in on who Mace is. He gives him conflicts that are so in line with his character. He gives him challenges that only he can grow beyond. I loved his rivalry with the character of Car Vaster. I loved learning about his people and the Summertime War, the different factions, the way it all works, the brutal warfare involved. And Stover does a great job of making Harun Kal feel suffocating and overwhelming. This is just some of my favorite writing in all of Star Wars. It's a great story. It's a great examination of a character who really is quite stoic and one note throughout the movies. Stover is able to dig deeper while also not changing the core of this character. It's the best Clone Wars book of all time to me, and you absolutely should check out Shatterpoint if you have not. So my top 4 is where it really got impossible to rank, and coming in at number 4 is Revenge of the Sith. A lot of you might be saying, oh my god, Revenge of the Sith at 4, it should be 1 or it should be 2, it should be in your top 3 at least. It's hard to put a novelization as much as I love the story in my top 3 because it's an idealized, enhanced version of something I already love. I've made no qualms on this channel or any of my channels about the fact that Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie, my favorite Star Wars story of all time. So part of me does feel guilty about, taking my favorite Star Wars story of all time, looking at the novelization, which arguably is the greatest version of it and certainly enhances it. It is very different, but also just saying, yeah, this is my top book of all time. I kind of wanted my top 3 to be books only, if that makes sense. But enough of justifying why this is number 4. Revenge of the Sith is an absolute masterpiece. It's Matthew Stover again. Stover just understands this story. He understands the characters, he understands the world, and he understands what George Lucas was trying to bring to the screen. Without the constraints and the limitations of a budget or actors or the amount of runtime you can have for the film, Stover is able to give you a complete picture. There are brilliant added scenes here. There are great moments of internal dialogue that allow you to really get under the skin of the characters, that completely enhances the moments from the movies that are already so powerful. The movie will always have that nostalgic place in my heart, that place in my heart that I can never replace with anything else, but the book is an absolutely exceptional look at a story that, for me, has captured my imagination and love of Star Wars since I was 7 years old watching it for the first time in the movie theaters. So back to my top 3, and again, this was really difficult because for me, number 2 and number 3 just switch depending on my mood. But this time I'm gonna go with number 3 as the Thrawn trilogy. The Thrawn trilogy is the absolute perfect sequel to the original Star Wars trilogy. And no, I'm not saying that disparagingly to the sequels we got on film. This just brilliantly captures the tone of the original trilogy. It has the characters in their prime, when they're younger, when they're still growing, when they're still learning, as opposed to being older and replacing them with other characters. Continue to explore and expand on certain ideas brought up in the original trilogy, cloning, the dark side, the way the Jedi impacted the galaxy, how they functioned amongst the rest of the galaxy, how they were viewed amongst the rest of the galaxy. There's some great tidbits about the Force in here. Zahn does a great job of world building here. This being basically the start of the EU. It's the thing that launched the Bantam era. It's the thing that launched Star Wars as a book initiative. And for all those historical aspects, it's amazing as well. But the fact that this was the centerpiece, this is the thing that almost every book in Star Wars after took from and said, we're going to add on to this lore, this world, the things it's crafted. The Thrawn trilogy is an absolute masterpiece. I love the original characters like Talon Karrde, obviously Grand Admiral Thrawn, one of the greatest Star Wars villains of all time, and he's so good as a villain here. Then another character like Mara Jade, which became one of my favorite female Star Wars characters of all time. Luke, Han, Leia are incredible here. Great moments for Wedge, great moments for Lando, great moments for C-3PO and R2-D2, Chewbacca. Everybody has time to shine in these books. It's one of my favorite classic Star Wars stories ever told, and if you've never read the Thrawn trilogy, probably the best place to start reading Star Wars, and it's certainly the best place to start reading the EU. It's now into the top 2, and when I make these lists, I haven't made one of these lists in a while, but when I make these lists, I often rotate this one with the Thrawn trilogy, and that is the Darth Bane trilogy. The reason I decided to go with Bane over Thrawn this time is that Bane to me is just one of those things that creates its own new lore, that really establishes a certain specific part of the universe. I often think about this one a little bit more, especially when it comes to the dark side, which is one of my favorite types of lore and expansions into the Star Wars universe. The dark side is just always so interesting. The ideology, the destruction, the chaos. And amidst that chaos, you have kind of a unifying force in Darth Bane. And when you read Path of Destruction, you are going to be completely enhanced and entrenched in what Darth Bane is doing, the brutality around his rise, because it doesn't come easy for him. He struggles. There are a lot of moments where he's not the Darth Bane you know from the lore that you might have heard about. So his rise to the top is excellent, but really what takes the trilogy over the top for me is when he gets his apprentice, Darth Zana. Darth Zana is one of the most underrated parts of this trilogy. Everybody talks about Bane and Bane's philosophy, and while that is all brilliant and really interesting, Zana might be the best character in this series. Seeing her grow and change from a child up to the most brutal Sith sorceress assassin that you could possibly imagine. It's heartbreaking, but it's also so good. And I love how each book in this series is a massive progression from the other. You have the origin story of Path of Destruction, you have the more solidifying of the ideology of Bane in Rule of Two, and then you have the transition of power, the attempts by Zana to now become the master in Dynasty of Evil. Darth Bane trilogy is right up there amongst the best. And coming in at number 1, to the surprise of absolutely no one who's followed either of my Star Wars channels over the last 4 years, Darth Plagueis is my favorite Star Wars book of all time. This is a book that just hits every Star Wars note I could ever want. Great lore expansions, you've got them. Compelling characters, you've got them. Brilliant villains, you've got them. A perfect examination of the prequels, you've got them. And oh yeah, this was written at the end of the EU, so it connects brilliantly to everything else I've spent my life reading. Darth Plagueis is such a rewarding book. It's a book that I don't necessarily recommend for beginners, but it's one that I think if you have just some EU knowledge, or maybe at least a lot of dark side knowledge, this thing just gets everything right. James Luceno's always kind of been a Star Wars encyclopedia, but Plagueis is his masterpiece. Plagueis takes his traditional critical character examination and plugs it into characters that are inherently evil. You get to meet Palpatine for the first time in this book, and he's not a nice guy really ever in his life, which I think works brilliantly with the character. You get to see his rise and the way he manipulates the situations. The Darth Plagueis book, yes, it's called Darth Plagueis, and Darth Plagueis himself is a great character, but you read this book for Palpatine. Palpatine steals 2/3 of this book. There are also great connections to the origins of Darth Maul, a lot of the origins around Dooku and his initial transition to the dark side. There's some great stuff with Dooku and Sifo Dyas, some Qui-Gon Jinn stuff, a lot of the stuff about the early planning for the clones. This is just the ultimate connective tissue book. It's got everything on top of being a really compelling story, and it's an absolute must-read if you're somebody who has consumed some Star Wars books. So thank you so much for watching this top 10. I hope it was worth the wait and that you guys enjoyed it. Stay tuned for my canon ranking, which will be coming soon, and then a joint ranking of my 10 favorite Star Wars books of all time. Make sure you stay tuned for more content from this channel. I'm trying my best to get content up and running here. If you want more Star Wars content from me every single week, I have another channel, Star Wars Lads. Link is in the description as well as the channel homepage. You can find that channel there. We talk and review Star Wars every single week. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody, and I will see you all next time.